So the test match at Eden Park between the All Blacks and the Wallabies is nearly here. This Rugby Championship closer than ever. And it all comes down to the final 2 rounds. And to add a little bit more excitement to the end of the competition, the Bledisloe Cup also on the line for these 2 sides. And in this preview, we'll be looking through at the lineups that have been announced, the key head-to-heads to watch out for, and then also a prediction at the end who we think will win this match. But jumping straight into it, first of all, the All Blacks announcing their side at 12:30 p.m. on Thursday. It was the earlier of the 2 announcements, and with the exception of no Scott Barrett due to a shoulder injury, it's pretty similar to what people thought it would look like. But number 1, Ethan Agroot, number 2, Cody Taylor, and number 3, Tyrell Lomax. Of course, the Wallabies have got some very impressive front rowers, so New Zealand had to go with their best. Cody Taylor, returning from his concussion, will be in great shape, with Samisoni Taukei'aho making his way. Off the bench in the locking duo, this is where we do see Fabian Holland as the number 4 and Tupou Vaa'i starting in at 5. Like I said, no Scott Barrett due to injury. Vaa'i as well as Fabian Holland. It's a combination we haven't seen in the locking duo as of yet, at least not in a starting lineup for New Zealand. And it will be very interesting because these 2, based off form, could be very handy for New Zealand in the future. In the loose forward trio, unchanged from what we saw up against South Africa, Simon Parker as the 6, Ardie Savea, who will also be captain for New Zealand, as the 7, and Wallace Satiti slots in at number 8. A nice balance of size and speed for this loose forward trio. Could be extremely dangerous up against the Wallabies, who have Hooper, McWright, and also Harry Wilson. But looking through at the backline, we do see the return of Cam Roigard. It's been quite some time since we've seen that man at international level. He partners with Beauden Barrett as that 9 and 10 combo. Caleb Clark back out on the left wing. Geordie Barrett and Billy Proctor, they will once again make up the midfield. Leroy Carter shifts from 11 to 14, and Will Jordan shifts from 14 to 15 for this contest. So that is the All Blacks starting lineup. Like I said, it's pretty similar to what many were expecting. The big surprise was no Barrett. And also, it kind of sounds crazy to say, but the fact that Caleb Clark is actually getting a game for the All Blacks maybe was the other surprise across the starting side. He has been patiently waiting, but of course that man has some highlight reel finishes up against the Wallabies, including last year's Rugby Championship. I believe the second game he got himself the double, so he will be one to keep an eye out for throughout this matchup for the Wallabies. They announced their side 3 hours later than the All Blacks, but it is a very strong looking Wallabies side. I have seen plenty of nerves building after seeing this Australian side, who have not been successful in New Zealand since 2001. So that is crazy. But looking at this team, perhaps they are as close as they have been for quite some time to putting together a winning combination. James Slipper, Billy Pollard, and Taniela Tupou are going to be the front rowers. James Slipper, this is also his 150th match for Australia. An absolutely insane number, definitely for a prop. Beauden Barrett is over the 100 for New Zealand. Same with Cody Taylor and Ardie Savea. But out of those 3, Beauden Barrett the closest to the 150. James Slipper already bringing it up for this game. In the locking duo, it will be Nick Frost alongside Lukan Salakaia-Lotto. He is always dangerous. We saw it up against the British and Irish Lions. Not so much for the Wallabies, but in the midweek matches, he was doing extremely well, pushing the Lions a little bit harder than some of the other players. So I'm glad to see him get the start in this contest, as well as the fact that there's no Will Skelton. You need a big body player who is going to throw his weight around. That's what you get with Lukan Salakaia-Lotto. In the loose forward trio, like I mentioned before, Tom Hooper, Fraser McWright, and Harry Wilson, the captain, starting in as the number 8. I feel like this match is kind of a battle of the loose forwards, although across the whole board, there are interesting head-to-heads that are taking place, but I'm thoroughly looking forward to the breakdown work of Fraser McWright, as well as that ball running of Harry Wilson, and Tom Hooper also offering a lot from that number 6 jersey too. In the backline, Tate McDermott gets the start for his 50th test match for Australia. James O'Connor slotting in as the 10. He's been one of the more dangerous first 5s throughout the Rugby Championship. Corey Toole, he finds himself once again on the left wing side. He will chase that ball hard, going up for pretty much anything that is on his side, and that is one part of the All Blacks game that has been heavily criticised, the aerial ability of this team, whether or not they can fix that for this game, because when you've got Corey Toole as well as Harry Potter, 2 men who love going up for the high ball, you need to be on your A game there. Lena Cattell alongside Joseph Suali'i in the midfield. Suali'i scoring a lot of tries throughout this Rugby Championship so far. Harry Potter out on the right wing, returning to the starting side, and then Max Jorgensen, he slots in at number 15 due to the injury of Andrew Callaway, who was initially more than likely going to be starting and at that jersey. So those are the two starting lineups, ladies and gentlemen, for these two sides, both going with the 5-3 splits. Off the bench, I think for New Zealand, Tui Pelotu definitely going to be one to keep an eye out for, seeing as he's just returning from his injury. And then for the Australians, it's got to be either Filippo Dangunu in their number 23 jersey, or perhaps even Ryan Lonergan, a man who is finally making his Wallabies debut after every time getting close, just never quite getting that cap. But in terms of the key head-to-heads, now normally we would look through at 3 key players, and I often found myself picking, let's just say, a number 8 for one team, and then picking the number 8 of the other team, not even purposely doing it. So this time we're looking at the key battles, the matchups that we're going to get to see at Eden Park. First one that comes to mind is definitely going to be Cam Roigard versus Tate McDermott for this contest. Tate McDermott, he's a player who makes his way off the bench for the Wallabies more times than not, whether that's because Nick White is starting or Jake Gordon. But McDermott's got a real ability of sniping round the side of the breakdown. He ups the tempo when he's on the field, and he also used to be teammates with James O'Connor at the Reds, so those two will have that cohesion, and that could really light this backline on fire for the Wallabies. Throughout the test match, Cam Roigard, a lot of pressure on him. He's just coming back from an injury that left him out of the rest of the Rugby Championship. A lot of Kiwis wanted to see him up against South Africa. That didn't quite become a reality there, but he's certainly got all of the talent in the world. He is also very good with those sniping runs. We see it for the Hurricanes all the time. And him and Beauden Barrett could be a very interesting duo throughout the 80 minutes. Moving on to the next head-to-head, I am going with Leroy Carter versus Corey Toole. Now, this is one of those head-to-heads that I was hoping to see earlier on in the week. I was transitioning Leroy Carter to the right wing for my own personal lineup that I did want to see take to the field. Corey Toole, I assume that in that case he would be marking up with them, and this will not disappoint. These two men know each other very well from the 7 Circuit. Anyone who doesn't know, the World 7 Circuit takes place over multiple weeks, and it is very often that you will find yourself playing a certain side one week, and then 1 or 2 weeks later, you will take them on again. And that is exactly what has happened many times for New Zealand versus Australia. When Leroy Carter was playing for the All Black Sevens and when Corey Toole was playing for the Aussie Sevens, those two have battled out there on the field. Toole has pace, Carter has power. You could actually switch those and the result would still be the same. These two are built to run the ball. They are built to contest in the air, and they will certainly beat a few defenders along the way too. Leroy Carter actually having more defenders beaten than any All Black throughout his first match up against South Africa. So that could happen again. Corey Toole, he could find himself with a little bit of space down the wing, but it is certainly must see when those two men go head to head. And the last battle, looking through at this lineup, you know, you could give the scrum a little bit of credit here, say James Slipper versus Tyrell Lomax, but I do think that there's a lot of intrigue around that number 7 jersey, Ardie Savia versus Fraser McWright. Now, Savia is very good in the breakdown. There's no denying that. But every once in a while, he will have a game where he doesn't get any turnovers. Whereas for Fraser McWright, I can't think of the last game that man hasn't at least got one. Now, he's very strong when he gets over the ball. He will not let it go. Savia is the same, but I feel like up against the Aussies, that's normally when we see Savia reach that next level, finds another gear, and really just does not like getting outworked by anyone in that loose forward trio. He's now got a little bit more pressure on him because of the fact that Simon Parker and Wallace Satiti, in my opinion, are both performing relatively well. Both young players. They've got Peter Larkai off of the bench too. And Savia's got the captaincy for this match. So the question is, will the All Blacks have a leader who does do exactly that? Lead from the front throughout this game. It's something that Scott Barrett has been critiqued about quite a bit. The fact that the man doesn't really talk a lot. But I do think that Ardie Savia, not only does his actions on the field speak for itself, but also he will communicate with that team and let them know exactly what is expected of them for this test match. But moving on to a couple of facts before we go into the score prediction for this contest. The All Blacks are on a 9-game winning streak up against Australia. Now, I'll be honest, when I saw that, I was actually pretty surprised. I felt like Australia had got 1 or 2 over New Zealand in recent times, or maybe that is just thinking a little bit further back. Their last loss up against the Aussies was actually back at Suncorp Stadium in 2020. Now, I want to say that was the game we saw a Barrett red card, and I'm actually going to quickly check that. Well, my apologies. There was no Barrett red card, but there was a red for New Zealand. It was Ofa Tuangafasi, and Scott Barrett in the 68th minute actually got a yellow card in that contest. That was back when Geordie Barrett was doing all of the kicking, and Ioane actually scored the first try in that game as well. So a few fun facts thrown in there for good measure. But throughout those 9 games in a row, there have been a lot split by only 3 or less points, actually including 2 of the last 3 times that the sides have played. The exception to that was actually the second match up against Australia last year in the Rugby Championship, New Zealand winning that, I believe, by 20. But these 2 sides know how to have a close game of rugby. And there have been so many times, you could argue, when Australia should have beaten New Zealand, but they weren't quite able to get that final blow. Now, this is a side in the Wallabies that were able to win in South Africa. This is also a team that have been finishing matches extremely well, better than any other side throughout this Rugby Championship. And that is the time period in a match of rugby where New Zealand have been struggling throughout recent times. That last kind of 20 minutes or so, it normally falls apart for the Kiwis, but now with Tui Pilotu off the bench, maybe that does help a little bit with the finish. But you'd have to say that Australia, they will want to start this match a little bit stronger than some of their other games, because if they can, they have a pretty good shot in that final quarter of the contest. New Zealand up against the Australians, they are also unbeaten for 30 matches in a row on New Zealand soil. The last win for the Aussies in New Zealand was 2001, and that was down in Dunedin at Carisbrook, 15 points to 23. It has been quite some time since that score, but like I said, there's been so many times that they've only been a conversion or a penalty or one mistake away from getting themselves the win. So the big question here for me is, will we see New Zealand here find that killer instinct? Because their back is against the wall. They lost by a massive margin, the biggest that they have lost by on New Zealand soil ever, up against South Africa just 2 weeks ago. But they aren't out of the Rugby Championship. They've still got a chance to be able to win the whole thing, but they would need 2 good wins over the Wallabies, who are fighting hard for every point they get, except for the 2 controversial ones last game up against Argentina. How about we call forward passes? Although, to be fair, I don't know if New Zealand can fully comment on forward passes as of late either, but I do think this is going to be a close game, one that could go down to the wire, and hopefully it does. At the end of the day, this is at Eden Park. There is a huge amount on the line. The Rugby Championship wide open. South Africa, they are playing up against Argentina, and they are expected to do very well throughout those 2 matches, so that adds that little bit more pressure on the Wallabies and New Zealand, partnered with the fact that the Bledisloe is also on the line for the 2-match series. Everything will lead to that massive amount of pressure turning into a brilliant test match, and I'm still pretty undecided about who's going to win it. But if I had to give a prediction, just because of what we've seen from New Zealand up against the Aussies in the past, I would say maybe around 25-18. Bonus point for the Australians, so that still gives them half a chance of winning the Rugby Championship, but at the same time, I do see New Zealand getting themselves the victory. Maybe it's not the smoothest performance we've ever seen from New Zealand, but a win at Eden Park is a massive one for the side's confidence, and I do think if they win this Eden Park test, they'll go into that next match up against the Aussies with a whole lot more confidence too. But thank you all very much for tuning into this preview. The game is kicking off at a nice early time of 5:05 p.m. New Zealand time. That is on Saturday, and we will be covering it on the channel with the live commentary, plus a little bit of a build-up too, so be sure to check that out. Let me know who you think will win this game though, and also the head-to-head that you're looking forward to seeing the most. And if you did enjoy, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you all for the next one.